Welcome back to the Forward Party podcast, where we focus on ideas that bring people together, strengthen civic life, and move our democracy forward. In this episode, we're taking on some of the biggest cultural and political conversations shaping public trust today, from free speech and campus culture to generational shifts and how leaders can rise above partisan gridlock. First, we'll be joined by Rikki Schlott, columnist for the New York Post and co-author of The Canceling of the American Mind. Rikki has written extensively about free expression, Gen Z, and the growing tensions around speech and education. We'll talk about how open debate can survive in today's polarized climate and why it still matters for a healthy democracy. Then we'll turn to Minnesota, where Mike Newcome, a Forward Party candidate for governor, is offering voters a new kind of leadership. He'll share why he's running, what Minnesotans are frustrated with, and how results-driven, nonpartisan leadership can restore trust in state government. Because strong democracy depends on both open dialogue and effective leadership. Let's jump in. Lieutenant Governor Healey and Governor Whitman, I'm so excited about our guest today. Rikki Schlott is a columnist and news features reporter for the New York Post, and she was the co-author of The Canceling of the American Mind. And when we talked about launching this Forward Party podcast, Rikki was one of the first people that came to mind as someone that I wanted to make sure joined us as a guest. Rikki's discussions on tolerance and free speech, and specifically around free speech on college campuses and how young people are engaging around partisan issues in a respectful manner, is really, really important. And so to our listeners and viewers today, welcome, Rikki Schlott. I'm so excited you're with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor.
So, Rikki, we have launched a Young Forwardists program at the Forward Party, and it's actually one of our fastest scaling programs at the party. We are on more than a dozen college campuses around the country. There seems to be a real appetite for an opportunity for young people to get involved in the political process, but they're wanting to do it outside the two-party system. We know we're seeing Gen Z register as independents at rates well above voters of other generations. Talk to us about your work, what's inspired it, what you're seeing on campuses right now.
Certainly that's been my own personal political experience. I'm 25, so the first election that I can really remember is the 2016 election with any sort of sophistication. And I remember my community in high school being torn apart, people losing friendships, and that's a kind of crazy way to come of age politically and to understand what the two-party system means. So by no means do I think it's surprising that more and more young people who've grown up in that relative similar time frame are coming to the conclusion that neither party really suits them, especially if the elections that they could participate in all feel like lesser of two evils elections to them. I think that it makes perfect sense that more and more Gen Z are registering independent. And I also think that we've seen some kind of heartening indications from this second Trump administration that Gen Z is not just going to dig their heels in and decide that if they give a candidate a shot, that they have immunity to do whatever they please. I think there was a 42% drop in approval ratings among Gen Z for Trump just within his tenure in the second administration. So I think Gen Z is largely informed. They're willing to update their priors and give people chances, but also revoke their approval where necessary. So I think that's actually a positive going forward for democracy if people are not just strictly partisan and saying that I voted for this person, so everything that they do is great. But I think growing up in that context has just made me really want to give a voice to more centrist, I'm personally more right-leaning, but centrist voices in Gen Z that do feel turned off by the two-party system, that do feel turned off by these choices that tear apart their Thanksgiving tables and their friendships and group chats and get them blocked on social media. It's a unfortunate way to grow up, and I think that certainly what the Forward Party is doing and what Andrew Yang has done is kind of a small glimmer of hope in a lot of disappointing activity coming out of politics in America.
Even with seeing more activities on campus in this last election cycle, well, in 2020, still the 18 to 34-year-old vote was about 18%. What do you see as the most compelling way? Is it the forward message? Is it to get them actually to vote? I mean, it's one thing to have these animated conversations and things, but how do we get them to the polls?
I think that one thing that I think was just a massive mistake, and it's not a really particularly original take on my part, but I do believe that if there was a Democratic primary in this past election and people felt that they actually had skin in the game and were participating in picking the politicians that they had a choice between in the end, that would have probably driven up voter participation ultimately. I think that was really disenchanting for a lot of people who, I have friends of all political stripes who long before the debate where Biden really kind of nosedived were saying that it doesn't seem appropriate that this man is running for president again, and they were disillusioned regardless of what their political affiliation was. And then the more or less coronation of Kamala Harris as his successor felt like, this is the party that's saying that they are behind democracy and democracy is in danger, but this isn't really a democratic process. And so I think that there was even more disillusionment that came from that experience. So hopefully now that we have like a kind of open field on both sides and on both parties going into 28, that can reinvigorate some participation. But I do agree that, voter participation is a problem, but certainly people are more impassioned, I think, in Gen Z, probably for better or for worse, because we have a 24-hour news cycle like bombarding us on our cell phones all day long since we were tweens. But yeah, it is disappointing. I do live in New York City, though, where people really showed up for a mayoral election. I don't love the results, but people did participate pretty robustly.
So Rikki, I was college president back in the 2016 presidential election, which is when we really got our first, sort of jolt of what this kind of political activity might be like that we're experiencing now. And one of the things that we still had at that moment was the ability to have civil conversations with one another to explain different points of view. We had whole meetings in our chapel where different groups of students with different viewpoints came together to discuss things. I think that would be pretty hard to do today in the same way. And so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on how, how should colleges and universities be contributing to more full and civil discourse now?
Yeah, I am currently enrolled as a part-time student at Columbia, and I was there during the the encampments, and so I've seen really firsthand how a campus can devolve recently. I think that they've made a lot of mistakes, but one smart move that they did make was instituting what's the word I'm looking for? Orientations around freedom of speech and how to have civil conversations. I don't think they're an automatic fix, but I do think that a lot of the protests on campus were a demonstration of the fact that kids did not know where the lines were and where their rights ended. And then the administration just really bungled a response in a profound way. But I think that could have been entirely avoidable if kids did know their rights and were empowered to express their views, whether or not I agree with them, and did understand where time, place, and manner restrictions ended and where their free speech rights ended. And I think that's the responsibility of a university to, as kids from all over the country or even all over the world who have not grown up in the United States and who do not understand necessarily where their speech is protected and where it's not, to inculcate them with not only the values of discourse, but also just the knowledge that would protect them against some of the consequences that some of the students at Columbia experience. So I think that it's sad that doesn't happen in our high schools, but certainly when I arrived at NYU, which is where I started college, I did not really have a full understanding or grasp of why free speech is really important, or why it's there to protect me, because it just seemed like a given. And I went to the Lawrenceville School, which is a great private high school, boarding school, and had like one of the best educations one could ask for. But at no point in time did we have a conversation about like what it means to be an American citizen, what protections you have, what civic discourse or civil discourse can do for a society, and why it's so important, and why you shouldn't just take those rights for granted, which I think is how we've ended up in a place where colleges feel like they so often devolve recently, because nobody knows how to respect other people's rights and nobody knows where their rights end.
How are you?
I'm curious if you agree with that, though.
I do, and I think that your focus on respect is really critical, because while we certainly defend and support free speech and others, we want to see it done in a respectful manner, and you can't have a conversation if the speech is framed in a way that others, the other person, or tries to diminish their human dignity. So I think it's really important that we learn how to express very opposite viewpoints, and to be able to debate them in such a way that we don't try to diminish the person to whom we're speaking. And that should absolutely be the role of the university, but it should be the role in high schools as well. And one of the things I'm really excited about is trying to work to get civics taught in a different way, in a more robust way,
Well,
in our taught at all, in many cases, in our high schools and our public schools. And also then thinking about this notion of national service. And I'd be, as a young person, I'd be very interested in hearing your thought on, a national service, not a requirement, but an opportunity for people to volunteer together to serve the country early on in their lives.
Yeah, I'm absolutely in favor of that being an opportunity, and also incentivizing that in various ways. I'm also a huge proponent, because it happened to me accidentally during the pandemic, of gap years and kids taking some time away from just sort of the achievement loop to discover some passions, or to read for pleasure for the first time, which is what I kind of felt like I got to do, or to, explore the country in a different way, or to even just get practical work experience, because I think that we do have a massive crisis on our hands with a student loan crisis and a lack of alignment between the degrees that we're producing and the job opportunities that are before people. So I feel tremendously blessed to have accidentally backed into a gap year and an interruption in my education due to the pandemic, because it actually afforded me time to explore outside the bounds of education. And I think that would really serve a lot of young people right now, especially as higher ed is sort of in a crisis moment. And I think that everyone needs to be a little bit more deliberate in the paths that they go down. So I think certainly if that's national service for some people, that's a great format for that to take place in. I've also seen there's a few programs where they do like almost foreign exchange, but within the United States. And I think that's such a great mission.
Yeah, I think it really is an opportunity for us to get to know each other differently, and certainly geographic exchange, but also serving people who are different than yourself, and probably acquiring skills that might not require you to go to college. If you, perhaps those skills could carry you into a very useful career if you were able to learn about technology or health or something else that is very much in demand. So
that's one of the things that the universities and colleges and actually the high schools and vocational schools could emphasize as part of their admission process, to make it clear that they're looking for students that have done something that represents moving out of their comfort zone. They've done something for others. I mean, I know they do look at those things, but they don't think they prioritize them as much as other academics. They don't prioritize that experience that really pushes, not just going overseas to have a trip with your parents south of France or something like that, but something where you really contributed. That is something that could be emphasized.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we're so excited about at Ford, is to advance ideas like this outside of kind of traditional policy ideas that the two-party advances, two legacy parties advance. Rikki, being on campus now at Columbia after all of the real difficult times that higher ed has had over the last few years related to free speech. How are you experiencing campus right now as someone whose politics trend center right? How are you experiencing it in the classroom right now?
So I'm actually on a leave right now because I'm writing a book. But I was last there during the encampment semester, and that was really bizarre. I feel like my first attempt at NYU was COVID interrupted college for me, and my second attempt was the encampment at Columbia. So I've had very bad luck. But that was actually a disturbing moment to me, because I did feel like there was a lack of respect for some free expression. I do think that it was obvious that the kids on campus had no understanding where their free expression ended, but I did feel that there was a lot of hypocrisy going on in free speech values, especially people on the right who so recently were demanding free speech for themselves and for campus conservatives, and then very quickly rescinded that when they didn't like the political views of people who were expressing themselves, whether they were despicable views or not. So I kind of found it to be a disillusioning moment. I felt that a lot of the so-called free speech champions really turned out not to be free speech champions, and there were very few principled institutions and voices through that experience. I would say the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, FIRE, was probably like one of the very few places that consistently defended left, right, pro-Palestine, pro-Israel, regardless of your views. So I think that was my largest takeaway. And in the wake of that, it seems like a lot of college campuses, a lot of the views that were kind of suppressed and views that people felt they weren't able to express since then have exploded into the open and had kind of gone underground and become a lot uglier. It seems like there's a lot more overt conspiracy theories coming out of Gen Z and Nick Fuentes fans, and it's not even ironic. You're not even sure if they mean what they say, but they're so far right that it's hard to believe that these are college kids coming out of American campuses. But that became a problem both at NYU and Columbia in the wake of this. So I think it was kind of a strange moment for free speech to experience firsthand, and it really kind of caused a backlash, in my view, of a lot of kids that felt suppressed coming out with a vengeance and expressing themselves. And it's a demonstration of what happens when you don't have actually civil dialogue with kids on the right and the left, and kids are self-censoring for years on end. Then people are going to rear a much uglier set of politics when you allow them to kind of speak among themselves and go into their echo chambers rather than having actual dialogue on campuses.
What do you think is the best way to reach these kids for forward? Because how do you think we would do the best job to reach them?
I mean, I think that campus outreach is really important, and just demonstrating that it's an option. I do think that there's a lot of sort of post-pandemic and even post like the Israel-Palestine conflict, just sort of rebellious energy that kids are getting out. And I even feel like there's a cycle of this that might be ending, and people might. I'm noticing that there are a lot of young people that are expressing very despicable views proudly all of a sudden, and then they actually say that to another human being and see it kind of taken down and see those views in conversation with something else, and they might have a crisis of their own opinions and politics. And so I think just being consistent and principled and demonstrating that you don't have to cling to an extreme, or you don't have to go to the extreme right just because it feels like your campus is on the extreme left, or vice versa if you're in a more conservative part of the country. I think just constant principled voices and constant principled institutions that are a place to turn when you wake up to whatever sort of echo chamber you found yourself in is the best that one can do. But certainly campus outreach and campus presence is really important. I mean, for whatever you make of the organization, I think Turning Point USA is like the probably like pinnacle of just demonstrating how grassroots organizations on campus can become a massive national footprint in the end.
Rikki, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how social media has contributed to the situation that we're in right now, and perhaps what kind of next steps we might take to rein in some of the damage that's being done by social media today among our youth.
Yeah, I just recently did a piece where I was just trying to be a fly on the wall in this sort of Nick Fuentes far right internet world, and just report on what people are actually saying, and what this ecosystem operates like. And I, on my own Twitter, a couple of times had looked up his name or tried to find like various accounts that were associated with his community. And that was maybe like a half a day's worth of research that I did. And then the next time I went on my Twitter, like every single thing on my timeline was clips of Nick Fuentes and like far right memes. And it was a really crazy sort of, I wasn't even really aware of who he was at that point in time, and he had never organically come up in my day-to-day life, being a more right-leaning person on the internet. But as soon as you go down that rabbit hole, even just for a few hours, I think it sticks to you, and then your entire conception of American politics or the landscape or how many people believe this sort of thing can really change very quickly. Like, I found myself thinking like, oh wow, he's really everywhere. And then I realized like, oh, I've been looking him up for like a couple hours. This is why he feels like he's everywhere for now weeks on end in my algorithm. And I mean, filter that through the brain of a teenage boy who hears about someone like Nick Fuentes from his friend and then looks him up at home, and then he's forever on his algorithm and his feed, and he's popping up. And I mean, you watch the stuff that he says because it's so insane that you can't really help it. So the algorithm keeps giving you more of it. So I mean, I think it's really, really easy to end up in a different place politically very quickly, just based on the selection bias of social media. And I experienced that myself growing up and being on YouTube like as a tween. And I went to like the extreme left and I was watching the Young Turks. And then like a couple months later, I'd be on the far right. And I just didn't know where I was going, or I didn't have an understanding of the political landscape in front of me. But you kind of just get pulled down one route. And so I think it makes perfect sense that we see Gen Z boys and Gen Z girls diverging because the algorithms are appealing to, gender differentials in their preferences or their politics or their biases. And people are really just creating a whole conception of the world and a conception of themselves online. So I think that social media is a massive part of this. And I'm friendly with Jonathan Haidt. I think that his book, The Anxious Generation, is hugely important. I'm skeptical of a lot of the kind of government intervention in telling parents how to parent their kids with technology, and or laws surrounding that. I'm kind of libertarian oriented in general, so I'm always a little bit afraid of, what's the slippery slope if we start saying you have to be 18 to be on this website, then the government has your IDs, you're accessing different parts of the internet. But I would say generally it comes down to like parents hopefully keeping their kids off of social media for as long as possible, and allowing them to develop a worldview in the real world. And also, I can't even understand why it would be controversial for schools to just have a ban on phones during school hours, because I think that meaningfully changes the quality of life of students, and also the way that they connect with each other and actually trade ideas rather than revert right back to their phone as soon as they have free time. So I think it has to be grassroots things like that. But I also think that Gen Z understands and knows that they don't like their relationship to social media. They feel addicted to it. They wish that they grew up in the 90s and they're nostalgic for different times and flip phones and stuff, but they feel like they're kind of trapped. But that awareness, I think, is an important start and kind of gives me hope that you could make some sort of societal change.
Rikki, thank you so much for joining us today. Truly, as I said, you're at the top of our list when we launched this podcast, because I think your observations are really, really important in framing how we're building this. So thank you so much, and we hope you'll come back.
Thank you. I'd love to. It's such a pleasure.
Great.
I'm so glad that Rikki came to join us today, because so much of what she is experiencing on college campuses is why we're building the space that we are at Forward. And when you listen to Rikki and talk about what she experienced, with the encampments at Columbia, grace and tolerance is not something soft and fluffy right now. It's actually really critical. And Governor Whitman, I think you were going to share something about a college campus in New Jersey.
Well, yes, when I first came in as governor, there was a Nation of Islam speaker who was scheduled at one of our state universities, and there'd been one who had spoken before, few months before, and it caused a great upheaval. And so there was a lot of pressure. You can't let him speak. This is a state school. You can't, state-sponsored university. You can't let him speak. And my response was freedom of speech. Anybody, let him come. Anybody can hear him who wants to. But it was the same time that Schindler's List had just come out. And so I called Steven Spielberg, whom I didn't know from a hole in the wall, and I said, may I have a copy of that speech to show on these campuses as an alternative? And he nicely gave us a copy of Schindler's List, and that's what we did. We had the two things side by side, and they could see one and see the other, and there was no problem at all. There was no upheaval, because I didn't stop Nation of Islam speaker because that was freedom of speech, and they could go if they wanted or not. But it was also provided another alternative view of that particular they were talking about at that time, which was anti-Zionism.
I mean, for young people who are between 18 to say 25, that's the moment when their ideas are being formed, and it's the job of a university or a college to help them learn new things, to hear new points of view, but to hear it in a balanced way, to hear both sides of each equation, and to do it in a civil way. If people don't learn at a young age how to disagree agreeably, how to be respectful of the person on the other side of the conversation, they'll never do it. It's going to be very hard. And as we were hearing, the impact of social media has been to allow people this sort of untrammeled expression that they don't have to worry about who's on the other side of their communication. They can say the most extreme, the most inflammatory, the most hateful thing they can think of. And that's okay, because they don't get to see the impact that has on the other person. But when you actually are in front of another human, and another human who perhaps you like and respect, but who has a different point of view, the conversation has to be different. You begin to try to ramp back perhaps some of the vitriol that you feel, and to try to listen to that other person. So there's a big role for colleges and universities here to build the kind of civic reflex, the civic muscle that we need to build the country back.
It's harder today, though, because unfortunately we're getting a message from the very top that is encouraging this speaking out and not worrying about, not tempering your speech.
Well, and not only that, but also trying to censor again what's happening. I think that one of the things that we have to be mindful of is not to get stuck in this pendulum swing, right? Where we're for a while you couldn't say anything that was not woke on college campuses. Now you're not allowed to say pretty much anything which isn't conservative on college campuses. And really, in truth, we want people to say everything on college campuses, and to say it in a balanced and civil manner and have those discussions. That's the most important thing we can do while we're learning.
And it's not just college campuses. It's all across the country right now. And actually, our next guest on our podcast is Mike Newcome, and he is running as the Forward Party candidate in Minnesota for governor. And all eyes are on Minnesota right now.
That's for sure.
And one of the things that Mike talks about is the dearth of leadership that we have in our country right now. And Governor, what you did as governor of the state of New Jersey as a leader to create space both for the presentation of Schindler's List and the speech by the head of the Nation of Islam, those things together, that showed leadership. And Lieutenant Governor, you had to model that at Babson with the dialogue that you facilitated during the 2016 election. Unfortunately, we are not seeing that nuance and that room for respectful dialogue in Minnesota. So I want to bring on Mike Newcome, who is the Forward Party candidate for governor, longtime business leader, former business owner, which I think is important that Mike likes to differentiate, that he has sold his business, and he's running for governor. So Mike, talk about the dearth of leadership in Minnesota and around the country, and what you're hoping to bring to the table to create space for conversation and problem solving in your state. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me. And if I can kind of go back on the point you guys were just making about people having the ability or being able to say whatever they want on the other side of a keyboard is very interesting. We just put out an email to a large group of people. And sometimes you get some emails back with some expletives. And it's a bit shocking. But I think what surprises people is that I respond to them. And I respond to them in a really kind way, saying, I hear you. I just don't quite understand why you're so angry, and let's have a conversation. And I just had a gentleman who he asked me 10 questions, and I spent the time last night and I answered all 10 of his questions. And all of a sudden this morning, another email was in my box and it said, "Hey, Mike, wow, thanks for responding to me. And by the way, I want to apologize for my original message I sent out to you, because as you full well know, things are hot in Minnesota and I'm just angry." And I acknowledged and I said, "No worries, I'm a Minnesotan, and let's try to have a dialogue like this moving forward instead of the expletives that came originally." So I think when you engage with people in a real, genuine manner and you acknowledge their frustration, all of a sudden the guard comes down and it's like, hey, wait a minute, we're people again.
Absolutely. I had that experience as lieutenant governor in Massachusetts. I was in charge of going out to cities and towns and telling them all that I was going to be cutting their budgets. I was not welcome, and I heard a lot of those expletives when I first went out, but I let them know that I was going to keep coming back every week and listening to them and trying to help and opening that dialogue, and it made all the difference in the world. I'm still, very good friends with a number of the people who I met during those years, and our cities and towns were stronger as a result of the fact that I went back again and again, and I'm sure you'll do the same thing in Minnesota.
Yeah, it's funny because I put out a video a couple days ago saying that some of the fringes really go hard in the paint on an independent candidate. And hard in the paint is an old basketball term. When you're underneath the net, the elbows are flying. And people it resonated with people, but they also found it funny that I said, boy, people are coming at me kind of hard in the paint. But to now take it to another thing of what's going on here in Minnesota, and we're talking about leadership, or what I've been calling lack of leadership. And what we've seen in Minnesota and around the country is we have a lot of problems, and I'm equating these problems to generations of partisan political mismanagement, now of our immigration system, and in Minnesota, of our government. And it's led us to this place where we're at. And a lot of people don't quite understand the history of how we all got here. And all they are listening to is their echo chamber. And my job as a candidate, number one, is to stand out from the crowd. So one of the things I'm running on is we're not going to name call, or we're not going to finger point, because my dad always said, if you need to use a nasty word to describe a political opponent, that should be an automatic disqualifier for public service. And it should tell you something, they don't have anything to run on. So we're bringing a fresh approach in Minnesota. And we just had a large campaign launch in central or northern Minnesota is what people refer to it as. And everyone to the person said, Mike, we're sick and tired of the finger pointing. We're sick and tired of the blame game. And we're sick and tired of government doing nothing for the people. So thank you for jumping in this race.
How are you finding the best way to get your message out, given all that's happening in Minnesota right now? I mean, it's a confusing time. You're in the national news. It doesn't seem as if it's going to de-escalate anytime soon. Obviously, that's got to be a huge challenge. But what tools particularly are you using to get over that?
And by the way, it is a challenge, because I've been on News Nation and some local channels, and all they want to talk about is what's my thought or opinion on what's happening. So what we're doing is we're acknowledging the situation, because you have to, and you have to if you're running for governor. But at the same time, I'm putting out on social media, whether it be Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, or X, I'm talking about issues, and I'm talking about things that are really affecting Minnesotans, like the affordability crunch. Now, right now, I'll be honest, that gets lost in the noise, and people want to bring it back to what's going on right now and what my opinion is. And my opinion has been the same since day one, as it has been for most Minnesotans, if you're paying attention. Everybody agreed that getting rid of violent, criminal, undocumented people from our state was a good thing. But how you did it really mattered. And right now, the how we're doing it is kind of jumped the shark. And so I've been asking for the last 2 weeks that we have a de-escalation to what's going on in Minnesota. It's not saying federal agents leave our state. It's saying go back to your barracks. We need to cool down. And protesters, go back home. And outside agitators, get out. because you're not solving any of the problem. And actually yesterday, law enforcement leaders from the metropolitan area had a press conference and basically echoed what I said, that right now the federal government is making some bad decisions. They're stopping people based on their color. They're going into homes and pulling out U.S. citizens, driving them around in their pajamas and bringing them back. And this is all happening because people are stressed out and leadership is not in control of what's going on. So I've just been asking for a de-escalation.
Well, that's
I think it's
good
pretty
way to approach it.
It's pretty clear to people on the outside that Minnesotans are caught between two political extremes right now, and the fact that there is partisan leadership in Minnesota is not an advantage right now for the people of Minnesota. And so I would hope that they would be looking to people like you to bring a sort of a more steady steer, to the boat.
To your point, you're absolutely right. And I guess we can only talk about left and right because that's who's in charge. We have the left side that there's no fault from their side at all. We have the right side, there's absolutely no fault at all. And every Minnesotan can come to the consensus that it was a good idea to remove violent criminal aliens, illegal aliens. But how we're going about it right now is not playing well with Minnesotans. And neither party will acknowledge the flaws in their approach. And yes, it is a breath of fresh air when I say that letting cooler heads prevail has now become more popular amongst Minnesotans. And I'm glad people are gravitating towards it because we have political leaders that they're just towing the party line. And I'm sorry, towing the party line 100% says you are wrong. And it shows Minnesotans that you're so biased and that everything you do from leadership comes from one direction.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Mike, you're running on a campaign of issues. You're running on, an opportunity to discuss the real kitchen table issues that are affecting Minnesotans. And at Forward, oftentimes we talk to folks about the barrier for entry for candidates like yourself who are trying to run outside the two-party system, and the fact that barrier for entry is intentionally very, very high because it was built by the two parties. How are you experiencing that in Minnesota right now? You have this platform. You want to talk about real solutions. How are the two parties making it difficult for you to enter that conversation?
Well, I'll use an example. So I was invited on News Nation as we'll call it the opposing viewpoint of the Speaker of the House of Minnesota, who happens to be a Republican. And they invited me on, they set the time, and all of a sudden the morning that we were supposed to go on, they said, "I'm so sorry, Mike, but we're going to have to make a change." And I knew exactly what happened. What happened is somebody made a call and said, if he's on, we're not coming on. And I felt that was a great opportunity for me. So I went at 5 o'clock in the morning this last Sunday and made a video in my basement. And I said, had I been invited on this show, this is what my position would have been. I cut it up. I put it out on social media, got 6,000 views in 1 hour. I then sent it to the producer who originally reached out to me, and I said, thank you so much, but this is what I would have come on and said. And within a half hour, I was on 3 separate programs on News Nation. So they definitely don't want to acknowledge that I'm out there. And I understand they're scared because my message resonates with the majority in the middle in Minnesota, and their message resonates with the 30% in either of their party. And so they're afraid to allow me in. And the other big barrier is, of course, financial. Because right now, the Republicans, I think they have 400 people running for governor. It's 15, but every week somebody else jumps in the race. And they have a built-in audience. So every week they get to travel the state, they get to go to a BPO and a caucus, and they get to have a little forum. And they throw meat to the meat eaters. And where we don't have anything is we have no ground establishment. We have a wonderful party here, but it's all of maybe 200 or 300 active people.
We're a startup in Minnesota the same way we're a startup around the country.
Yeah, we're a startup. So our biggest challenge is we're trying to get out around Minnesota. We're setting up meet and greets, and we're getting out, and I'm talking to people, and I'm doing every podcast, and I'm showing up at every bar. The benefit that I had is fortunately, I've been fortunate in my life, and I had a good business and I've had a great career. So I have invested to date over $200,000 of my own money into this effort, which then shows people, hey, this guy is willing to invest his own money. Maybe we should jump on board. And in the first 4 weeks of our campaign, really in December, we raised just under an additional $40,000 from outside people, which tells you a guy that never ran for public office, that jumped in and no one knew him from Kane, raised $40,000 in under 4 weeks. People are starving for a viable alternative to the status quo.
Mike, have you had any reaction or interaction with current office holders, either at the state or the local level, and how are they responding?
So, yes, I have. And I can't tell you who they are because they'll get thrown out of their parties. And that's another perfect example of the duopoly.
Right.
I have been contacted by both Republican legislators and Democrat legislators who've said to me, Mike, we can't wait for you to win because we actually can work with you. You full well know that because of who we're aligned with, we can't step outside the zone. But you're a safe harbor. We can go back to our constituents and say, look, we won. And the other side can go back and said the same thing. We're happy to work with you. And then they can go back to their constituency and say, look, we won. And I said, I don't care who wins as long as Minnesotans win. So it's really interesting, the people who reach out to me behind the scenes and say, I can't wait, and we're going to support you. And in fact, one of the gubernatorial candidates, and I'll give him credit, his name is Dr. Scott Jensen, an extremely nice person. And he ran for governor in the last go around and lost to Governor Walz as a Republican. But he put out a tweet, or on X now, he put out an X, I guess X or a tweet, and said, we need a viable third-party candidate in Minnesota because it'll make all of us better. And I said, good for you, Dr. Jensen, for bringing to light that a viable third-party option is going to make your party better, it's going to make the Democrats better, and it's going to make Minnesota better. So I think behind the scenes, a lot of people, are supporting me. And I think where the big support will come is in the fall when everything shakes out here. And I think it's why we're going to win this campaign, because common sense Democrats and Republicans recognize that I have the most viable chance of winning a statewide election.
So, Mike, when you're out talking to people about the things they really care about, what are they speaking to you about? What kind of policies are you offering them, and what are they asking you for?
Well, I think the biggest thing right now is everyone's focused on the fraud. But fraud comes back to an efficient and an accountable government. So everyone asks me, Mike, what is your plan to address those issues and the affordability issue? And what I tell them is, my plan is not what my counterparts are saying. People are running around the state of Minnesota saying, we're going to lower your taxes, and that will solve the affordability issue. And what I say to that is, that's the equivalent of handing out shots of whiskey on the deck of the Titanic. It may make you feel good for 20 minutes, but that ship is still sinking. So what I tell people is, until we address the root cause of the problem, which is our government and our government agencies, once we go to those and we address the waste, the fraud, and all the problems, everything else will fall in line. So I tell them we're going to do a top to bottom root canal on our state agencies. We're going to start by appointing the best and brightest at the commissioner level. And from there, we're going to work with the rank and file people who have been working in these agencies, starving for a voice. They've been starving for a voice to be able to solve problems, because we're going to get the political agendas out of these agencies. We're going to update their technology, and we're going to give them an actual opportunity to do what's right and make their agency efficient. And we can start that by the top, and I say at the bottom. And once we solve that problem across, whether it's Department of Health and Human Services, Corrections, MnDOT, everything else will fall in line. We can really address long-term tax relief, income tax relief. Once we take pressure off cities and counties, we can talk about property tax relief. But none of that is sustainable with typical political BS talking points. I want to fix the problem, and then moving forward, we can have sustainable growth in Minnesota.
I think you just got the support of all the public servants in Minnesota, because I have found that most of them, those people appointed to those positions who have gotten those positions really want to do their job. They want to do what's right, but they get constrained by the political leadership that puts handcuffs on them in so many instances. So
you're spot on. By the way, there's roughly 40 to 45,000 hardworking Minnesotans that have been in these agencies that have been being punished for all this fraud, waste, and abuse. And what I want to tell you is help is on the way. There may have been some delinquent people in there, but the vast majority, and the people I talked to have all said, Mike, we want to do what's right on behalf of the taxpayer, but due to our political overlords, that has not been possible. So when I appoint somebody as commissioner of the Department of Health and Human Resources, they're not going to be a political hack. They're going to be somebody coming in with a 6 Sigma degree, ready to go to work for Minnesotans.
Yeah, this is where your business background is going to come in so helpful because you'll be able to actually make sure that things are done efficiently and effectively and without any kind of bias. So you won't be trying to put in political hacks who supported your campaign to do these jobs that they're not actually qualified to do. You'll be looking for the best qualified people. So that's a great gift you can give to the people of Minnesota.
Yeah, and as a lieutenant governor and as a governor, we know that a lot of, it's a bit, I don't want to come off Pollyannic as though it's a simple solution and to be able to leverage my business background and say it's all going to work. Government operates different and has different needs than a business. And I do recognize that, but there's a 60% of what I can bring from my business background to transform government, and that will work. So I'm not of a delusional sense to believe you just all of a sudden run it like a business, because we all know, and you guys especially who've been there, government is not a business. We take care of everybody, and we take care of the most vulnerable. And in a business, that's not necessarily the case. But when you're going in and trying to do everything all at the same time, you come in with the approach of, I know what's going to work, and I fully understand what may not work in government. But I don't want to hear any more. It's just the way it is. It's just government. It's inefficient.
Mike, we are so excited to watch this campaign swell and grow as Minnesotans find you and look to you for leadership. I think the people of Minnesota are frightened right now. People are angry. They don't know what to do. They're hurting. We are all watching across the country, Minnesota, praying for the people of Minnesota. And I'm so grateful for the fact that you have stood up to fill that space and that need for leadership, to take the temperature down. And I hope people will heed your advice and take a cooling off period. Because ultimately, folks are all looking for the same thing, as Lieutenant Governor Healey and Governor Whitman and I were speaking about earlier. They want the right things for their families.
I agree. And I thank you guys for your time. And for your listeners, if you want to get involved in our campaign, and as any good business person or salesperson, we're always looking for investments and we're always looking for support. So feel free to go to newcomeforgovernor.com. That's NEWCOME forgovernor.com. We'd love your investment, or we'd love your support in any way, because when we succeed in Minnesota, it is going to help the forward cause across the country. And what it's going to do is, when you guys decide you're going to put up a 2028 presidential candidate, as the governor of Minnesota, we'll be able to support him.
Well, that's another podcast, Mike.
We're not there yet.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. Really great to see you today.
A pleasure.
Have a good day. See you later now.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.
Lieutenant Governor, in the last couple of episodes, we've talked a lot about political structures. We've talked about why this current climate is ripe for change, and why we think right now our solutions, we've talked about our fulcrum strategy, are the thing that is really going to move the needle. But today was the first time we talked about the broader cultural reality of the work that we're doing, and the general kind of civic unrest that we're experiencing, and what it means to build a new political movement where people can come and have respectful dialogue and engage. So I thought today's conversation was really important.
I think it was, and I really appreciated the connection between the two guests who we had today. They both are trying to create space for society to reach a better equilibrium, to step back, to take a pause, and learn again the skills that we need to keep the country together, to rebuild the fabric of society, whether it's learning how to communicate again, how to use free speech appropriately and not to go, beyond the bounds of proper free speech, or whether it's simply how do you run a state that isn't going to get caught in the between the forces of the far left and the far right, and become just almost held hostage to these broader national forces that are going on in politics today. Someone like Mike Newcome, who's running for governor of Minnesota, he just wants to serve the people of Minnesota. He just wants to do the right thing. He wants to make government more efficient and effective, and to be sure that there isn't corruption, to make sure that laws aren't broken. He certainly does want violent criminals out of Minnesota, and he wants it all done in the right way. And so he's able to balance these things that the current political system is just not constructed to do, because they have to be right about everything all the time. Whereas someone from the Forward Party, someone who's an independent, can say there's some truth here and there's some truth there. Let's try to do the best thing for our constituents.
Well, they were powerful voices, frankly, for what we are trying to do, which is exactly that. They evidenced a real understanding of how deep these issues are, and then also a very strong commitment to doing it right, with a voice that I think both voices actually are very compelling. And they're the kind of things that I believe people want to hear these days. It's what they're longing for, to which they respond when they hear it. And they're going to be grabbing these opportunities where you have a Mike Newcome, and they're going to say, this is what we want and need. He's going to be a wonderful forward candidate. Going to be great for us, I think, whether he wins or loses. But I think he's going to win, because he's got such a powerful voice, and his message is it's so straight on. It's just, here's who I am, here's what we need to do. We don't need to yell at each other to get it done. We can't get it done if all we're doing is yelling to each other, at each other, if we're not listening, if we're not communicating. He's going to be a great candidate for us. And to hear the voice of someone who is younger and who is in the midst of these transitions with young people about how to communicate and where they're communicating and how they get their information, I think they've been very compelling speakers, both of them.
I mean, Mike Newcome seems like he is credibly speaking the truth.
Yeah.
He's not spinning anything.
Right.
And people are so hungry for that. They're so ready to hear someone who isn't trying to persuade you, who's just really telling you the truth.
And they can understand that. They pick that up in an instant, whether you're real or not.
Absolutely. Yeah, people are hungry for authenticity. And I think this is what's so exciting about Forward is talking to people like Mike and Rikki today, who are these really extraordinary and important voices, but then plugging them into the infrastructure that we are building at Forward. So hopefully all of our listeners out there that are so inspired by people like Mike and Rikki then say, well, okay, now what do I do?
Right.
And they can come to Forward and get involved with us here. So thank you all so much. It was great seeing you today.
Great to see you, always.